Darwin, his theory is called natural selection. Within a species there is variation from differences in genes and some mutation.
This is Peter Helland with Dr. E. Michael Jones on the show Israel. And Mike is, again, writing another book. And we have the first part of it here that I've been reading. And the title of this first part, I don't know if the title is of the whole book, but it's called The Rise and Fall of the New Atheism. And just a summary of it, it's atheism and evolution and then where it's playing out, especially as it relates to the English and the American Empire. Now, the scripture that we were talking about, that what you're doing reminds me of, is in Proverbs. It says, the wise man scales the city of the mighty, and he tears down the stronghold in which they trust. And I think what you're attempting to do here is that on a metaphysical level, you believe you're locating where the mighty, the empire, gets its strength.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about the new atheism, which was a phenomenon that occurred about 10 years ago. What are we talking about here? Why suddenly now atheism? Well, I think there are a number of ways to answer that question, but one of them is that basically we have the inner logic of the regime working itself out over time to the point where it will finally put its cards on the table and say, this is what it's all about. And it fits in with other things I've done. Basically, what you're saying is here that this is atheism is freedom. Basically, now there's no God, so therefore you're free to do whatever you want. Okay, so it's always an impetus to sexual liberation. We've already talked about this. But that's the exoteric message of atheism. The esoteric message is, of course, the exact opposite, which is basically from the point of view of the people who rule over us, the oligarchs who rule us with an iron rod. What they're saying is, there's no God, and that means we don't have to exercise any moral restraint in exploiting you or crushing you when you get in our way or anything like that. All the glove is off, the iron fist is ready to smash you now. That's the other side of the coin, and I think that's what we're seeing now. I think basically what we're seeing is a group of people who, the oligarchs, let's call them, who have just thrown all restraint to the winds. You know, you better go along with this, because if you don't, we are going to punish you. We are going to punish you for your bad thoughts. This is all traceable, I think, to the open admission that the empire is really about atheism. So the key belief that animates this empire is atheism, that we have become God. Prometheus. If you remember the Rockefeller Center in New York City, what's the central symbol there? It's Prometheus. They have a big statue of Prometheus as you walk into Rockefeller Center. That's what these people believe.
The temptation in the garden was, ye shall be as gods.
Right.
And then you were, in your article, your evolution wants to give you the idea that we started out real primitive, many gods.
Okay, you can say that. Okay, I just said that. Let's say I'm an oligarch and I tell you that. Well, you're going to say, oh yeah? Well, who says so? You know, so it's not as if they're just going to come out flat out and say what I just said. No, they're not going to say that. They need some type of philosophy or ideology that will give this plausibility, and that is evolution. There's not one new atheist in the bunch in this whole era, this whole 10-year period, who has not referred to Darwinism as the proof that there is no God. Now, obviously, you cannot prove a negative. You cannot they even admit that. You cannot prove that God doesn't exist. And this is where the argument from evolution kicks in.
But I was listening to Robert Sungenis, and he was quoting a study, I think it was in Germany. People were not going to church, so they were trying to figure out why they weren't going to church. He said 47% said it was they believed in the scientific explanation of the worldview as opposed to the church.
Right. So what they bequeathed, and this is important even for countries that are not like America, you know, like the headquarters of the evil empire. let's take a country like Iran or like India. Okay, I was in India a couple of years ago in winter, and I was in Mumbai, and so we first went to the temple of Ganesh in Mumbai, and you stand in line, and before you get to the Ganesh, who's a kind of chubby fellow with an elephant's head, there's a big silver rat, and the Hindus will walk over and they'll put a garland around the rat's head and a little mat on the back of the rat, and they'll whisper in the rat's ear. And that rat is then supposed to run to Shiva to have him do, what you're asking for.
Mediator.
Okay, and then you finally get to Ganesh, and there's the statue, and basically the Hindus there, give the priest something, and the priest gives them something in return, and that's kind of, they're the first fruits. You hand it over to Ganesh, and then you leave. So we left, and we went to the Nehru Science Center. And the Nehru Science Center, when you're waiting to get in there, there's a huge mural of creation, basically. And it's like the Ascent of Man mural in the New York, it's a science museum, so it's like the New York Museum of Science, where, evolution, you see the whatever it is crawls up out of the water, and then it's a monkey, and then it's a bent over man, and then it's a standing up straight man, and then it's Teddy Kennedy or something like that.
Everybody was
whatever. Okay, well, this is a little bit different because it's from the beginning, the Big Bang, which is the beginning. Well, what's the beginning? Well, it says there, atoms formed. Okay, atoms formed. What do you mean? You mean shit happens?
Not Adam, A-D-A-M. You're talking about
Atom,
A-T-O-M.
A-T-O, atoms form.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. There's no foundation for this. And so it's like the Indian cosmology. There's no foundation for that either. It's like, the world's on 4 elephants. The 4 elephants are standing on a turtle. Well, what's the turtle standing on? Well, it's turtles all the way down. Well, it's atoms formed. Get to the heart of the matter here. There is a radical philosophical, metaphysical incoherence that is part of this scientific ideology, but what they have received is basically a dichotomy from us. Even if they don't agree with everything, the dichotomy is basically religion on the one hand and science on the other.
Which fits in with separation of church and state eventually.
Right, it will eventuate in that in some countries. But even in Iran, where they have abolished the separation of church and state, they have an Islamic theocracy, they basically accept the same dichotomy. And what does the dichotomy mean? Well, religion is okay. You can have these beliefs, if they're consoling to you. They're kind of like little warm thoughts that you have to keep you, keep you calm during a storm or something like that. But they're not real. If you want to go to reality, you have to go to science. And I think this is what happens. We talked about it this weekend. We're together. You had the experience at Notre Dame. Our friend had the same experience. You walk in as a freshman, and they give you a course in geology in which they tell you basically what I just said. Okay, that you can have your religion, call it Catholicism if you want, and if you find it consoling to go to Mass and stuff like that, that's fine. But it's not real.
No.
The only real thing is science. Science says, and then we have, all of the atheists are in unanimous agreement, science says evolution. That is science. They're synonymous.
Well, I used to have a show, I kept my textbook from Father Murphy my freshman year. And it's from Yale. I was there in 70. It was published in 69. And in the beginning, it says there used to be these fantastic beliefs that people believed that the earth was created like 4,004 years ago. And it just kept hitting on these, very unscientific analysis by big professors,
Right.
They were just so wrong. And then with the discovery of Darwin and all, just overturned.
So this is another instance. We both went to the 50th anniversary celebration of Land of Lakes at Notre Dame, where they all got together. The college professors got together and patted themselves on the back for being agents of governmental social engineering, and for which they have been amply rewarded financially. And if you ever need a place where that's proof, go to Notre Dame. And they've got money to burn over there because they're charging their students $65,000 a year. And in addition to that, they get government grants. Okay, so this is what they have done. And basically, Darwinism is absolutely essential to the social, the intellectual re-engineering of Catholic students. And you found that yourself because one of the first courses you have is geology, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, back then you weren't allowed to pick your courses. I mean, they symbolically you did. I said, well, I'll take these 5. Well, they didn't. I didn't get any of those 5. So I was given behavioristic psychology, which was B.F. Skinner. I mean, I was reading B.F. Skinner's writings right away. Father Murphy, geology, which was pure evolution. It didn't even bring in theistic evolution. It was out of Yale. Well, you're unaware that this is even a factor.
No, it's
you're unaware.
This is a form of child abuse. They should all be arrested for child abuse, because this is what it is.
Because I don't think any of the students, even prior to me, knew this is.
No, and first of all, it's you're not letting people know what they're in for. It's false advertising. It's child abuse, and all they do is congratulate themselves for what a wonderful job they've done, because they've made money, and that's their god over there, right next to evolution, or evolution and the money god are both have niches in the same pantheon, if you want to put it that way. So, well, what are we? Another thing about Notre Dame, which is that they abolished metaphysics and Thomistic theology at around the same time as Land O'Lakes. So it was all part of one big scheme, basically to steal the university from the Catholic Church, which is what they did, and then place it at the disposal of the federal government, for which they received lots of money to basically socially engineer Catholic students. So you arrive as a freshman, as a Catholic, and when you leave as a senior, you're a committed Darwinist who also may believe in the Catholic Church and the existence of God, even though they're contradictory, which means one of the symptoms of this is you get stupider, because in addition to everything else it does, Darwinian evolution and natural selection make you stupid, because it abolishes the concept of causality. You cannot understand causality if you believe evolution. So you'll have, Dawkins was on a radio show with another atheist, and some guy calls from Scotland. It's an English radio show. Guy calls from Scotland, talks about how Jesus entered his life, and you can see them, they're all rolling their eyes, like, what is this hick? Well, okay, let him talk. It's all harmless, I guess. And then the guy says, but Richard, I have a question for you. Was it ever nothing? And at this point, it's radio, but you can see his face kind of turning white, because he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know what to say.
He met his match.
Well, because this is a metaphysical question, and polite people don't ask metaphysical questions when they are discussing evolution. Because you may have noticed that evolution, natural selection, can only work on something. If there's nothing, it can't work, right? Everybody knows that. And so you say, well, it's not a biological question. Well, you guys are not talking about biology, are you? You're talking about cosmology, you're talking about metaphysics, and you're talking about God. And as soon as you start talking about God, you're talking about metaphysics and theology. So it's your own damn fault. Because this is not about biology. It's not about biology. It's about keeping poor, stupid proles in line by first of all, giving them the impression that they're stupid. So the Scotsman doesn't know he's stupid. So he keeps asking these questions. But Richard, if there's nothing, then there can't be something. Well, he says, it's so good. He says, you need to read a book. And then he says, I've written 8 books.
So he's deep into it.
Oh, he's so stupid. I mean, it's pathetic. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, it's as if, you're the one who brought up God. God has nothing to do with biology. Okay, that's theology. That's not biology. You're the one who brought it up. You're out of your depth. If we had called you in to be on a talk show and talk about the nuclear missiles in Korea, and you couldn't find Korea on the map, you'd be laughed out of the studio, wouldn't you? Well, this is exactly what these guys do. And they get away with it because the elite, the oligarchs, love atheism. Because with atheism, there's no moral law. And when there's no moral law, they can crush you without thinking twice. That's why they like atheism.
Well, they are like gods. I mean, like it says in Genesis, you could be, they kind of are the priesthood.
They are. Of course they are, because this is what is real. This is because it's science, and science is what is real. And anything else is just a figment of your imagination.
Well, I told you that when I went to the Cotton Bowl after I had Father Murphy for a semester. I got into these clashes in Dallas because they had a big, huge Christian convention there. And they had their Bibles. And I'm arguing, to me, they were arguing Adam and Eve. And I thought the Bible meant Adam and Eve to me. And I'm going, where are you guys coming from? You know, I would get in debates and argument. And eventually I wandered to a bookstore. I had a few drinks. And I got Desmond Morris.
Malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man.
Well, we went there to have fun, you know. We weren't going there to debate this issue.
Yeah.
But I got Desmond Morris's Naked Ape, and I said, this is what's true. The Bible is not true. I mean, you know, and I wanted...
Well, you were a good... That's what Notre Dame was there to teach you. Okay? They are the guardians of truth, except that they can't explain anything. They can't... Look, if you had stuck with biology, you know, maybe we could... But no. You're the one who got into the God business. You're the one who wrote the book, God is Not Great. That's Christopher Hitchens' book. He's one of the Gang of Four. Okay? So, you're out of your depth. You can't locate North Korea on a map, and you're mouthing off on, talk shows all over the world. Okay? So what's your explanation? What's your explanation? You're the guy who said it. You're the guy who's going to talk about the beginning of it all, right? Okay, so what does Daniel Dennett, he's one of the Gang of Four. Daniel Dennett wrote a book in which he said, he's the only trained philosopher of the group, okay, and he said, the universe created itself ex nihilo, from nothing.
Well, almost nothing, he said.
And then he said, well, almost nothing. So, okay, let's take that in two parts. Okay, let's take the second part first. If it's almost nothing, it's something, okay? Which means it's not nothing, which means it already exists.
I remember
okay?
when I was in high school, I wrote a little essay, and I didn't write much for the teacher. It turned out to be more or less a fundamentalist Christian. And the essay was, I said, if we can find that one, just a little speck of something, then we got something to go with. He said, but we got to figure out how that one something got there.
Now, how did it get there? Well, now you know.
It's an obvious problem that even somebody in high school knows.
Now you know. It's very simple. The universe... Let's forget about the little something part. Let's assume he didn't embarrass himself by saying that. Let's just take the first part of the statement. The universe created itself ex nihilo. There's the answer, right? Well, no. No, there's a problem there.
No, because the Big Bang requires something, right?
Okay, that's what we're talking about. The Big Bang, it's got to start with something. Okay, so there it is, whatever it is. No matter how small, no matter how big it is, there it is. Okay, so that, if you want to say, well, okay, let's simplify it. It wasn't the universe that we know now. It was the universe at the very beginning, which was this thing.
Really intense, really dense.
I mean, it was
real dense.
Yeah, it was dense, man. I mean,
Hercules couldn't have compressed it anymore.
You would have trouble. You're probably real heavy, but it's something. Okay, so that something brought itself into existence. Well, wait a minute. We got a question now. I can hear the Scotsman saying this now. Well, if it brought itself into existence, it had to exist before it existed.
Well, how do you know that? I mean, that's where they have to beat you.
No. This is because I have reason, and there's no way to get around that. And I don't care how many atom smashers you have to answer that question. In order to create itself, it had to exist before it existed. That's impossible. There's no way you can get around the fact that that's impossible, so that cannot happen. That cannot happen.
The scripture would say these people are cunning deceivers and they're malicious. I mean, they would describe, because they're trying to lie.
Or maybe they're just stupid.
But somebody's behind it.
I know there are people behind it, but I mean, this is right up there with stupidity, it seems to me. Okay, they have no training whatsoever. This man supposedly has training as a philosopher, but he doesn't understand the fundamental fact of you can't exist before you exist.
Right, and he
impossible.
just tries to sneak it in without you noticing.
So how do they sneak it in? How do you get around this insurmountable fact? Well, you bring up Darwin, and you bring up natural selection, and you say, well, it's like a lot of small steps. A lot of small steps, and even our favorite atheist, Richard Dawkins, has to create a myth. Now, normally they don't create myths. This is antithetical to the whole English ideology. Newton said, hypothese non fingo, I frame no hypotheses, but in order to explain himself, Dawkins has to create a myth, and the myth is called Mount Improbable. And the issue is, how do you get to the top of the mountain? Well, there are two ways, he says. Okay, there's a steep cliff overhang, and you can try and jump, but you're never going to make it. But there's another side where it's a gradual step, and this is the essence of evolution.
I mean, once you can get to the mount, then it's possible.
So what's at the top of the mountain? It's something like an eye. Okay, how do you get to this organ of complexity? And the discussion about evolution just goes round and round in circles about complexity. It's not really essential to this discussion. I don't care what it is. Let's make it as simple as possible. The simplest thing you can imagine, with no complexity whatsoever. How do you get there from nothing?
First of all, there's no cells that are the smallest
There's no
cell
cell
is super.
that's simple.
No, it's super.
Every cell is incredibly complex because it is there. It has a purpose to fulfill. So it's as complex as a 747 that has a purpose to fulfill, and so therefore complexity is there to fulfill the purpose. If you have no purpose, well, you don't have to have anything, and certainly something simple will be just as good as something complex, because there's no point to it. But as soon as you have a point to it, well, then you have to have complexity. And as soon as you have complexity, you have to have design. But that's another discussion.
Because that's what you said, Newton kind of got rid of that teleology.
Teleology, he banned teleology from the universe because he changed the whole understanding of motion. Okay? But that's another, it's related, but it's another issue. How do you get, let's say, what are these small steps? What do they mean by that? If you talk about the eye, okay, you have Christopher Hitchens in his book, God is Not Great. Now, there's a journalist, he doesn't have any competence in biology, certainly no competence in philosophy, certainly no competence in metaphysics. So he says, well, we evolved from blind bacteria. Okay, all right, that's good. I mean, it doesn't explain how the bacteria got there, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, okay? From blind bacteria, we have the eye. Okay, how did you get from being blind to having the eye? Well, there's no explanation for this possible according to natural selection, because natural selection has to work on something. In other words, it has to be in operation, and it has to be competing with other things in operation, so it shows some type of advantage, and then then natural selection can choose this group over that group, and suddenly that's how it's supposedly how they pass it along. That's another issue, but that's what it's got to do. Well, how do you select for sight when all you have is blindness?
Because you can't get a change.
A blind bacteria, what's natural selection going to work on there?
Yeah, how does it go from blind to a sight?
Well, so what we now have to do is sleight of hand, the same rhetorical sleight of hand that they do over and over and over again. So Hitchens says, well, in another instance, well, light-sensitive cells on a whatever, some little organism. Well, wait a minute. If it's light-sensitive cells, that's another word for an eye. So
it's responding to light.
Well, if you're responding to light, that's an eye already. So what's the sleight of hand? Basically, you're saying the eye evolved from an eye.
So well, it's not blind bacteria
no,
at that point.
No, it's not. It can't be. It can't be because natural selection can't work on that. And there's no evolutionary value in structures that don't see. It can't select. In other words, if the organism has an eye and it can see something and it goes over and eats it, then it gets bigger and stronger, it can pass on its genes. Well, if it's blind, there's no natural selection possible here. Can't see anything. That's what blind means.
But see, you're proving what you made, one of your points is that these people do not want there to be a God, right? I mean,
Right.
And so they're working to get what they want.
Yes. So basically what you're saying here is it's irrational. This denial of God is irrational. You can prove the existence of God. It's not an article of faith, it's an article of reason. So as I said, I was in Delhi, okay, and there's the Hindu boy in the class. I give a little talk, and the Hindu boy stands up and he says, can you prove the existence of God? I said, yeah, I can.
Now, why do you think he asked that question? He just was free to do it? I mean, it just happened?
I think because he's a Hindu, and he understands that there's some type of lack of foundation.
So he wanted to know what you would say from your perspective.
I think he understood intuitively that there's no foundation to anything that goes on in India right now. There's no logos to the religion. There's no metaphysical tradition. And science is basically atoms formed. That's what he learns when he goes to the Nehru Science Center.
And how old was this?
16.
16. So he's at the age. I mean, that's the age that I wrote that essay.
Yeah. So you're starting to ask these. This is a metaphysical question.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I can. So I said, nothing comes from nothing. There is something. Therefore, there was never nothing. This something could not bring itself into existence, because in order to do that, it would have to exist before it existed, and that's impossible. Therefore, something else had to bring this into existence. Now, I didn't go into this, but I mean, basically, we have the, I could have brought up, well, maybe some other created being brought it into existence.
Well, that's what they tried with the aliens planet thing. That's
Maybe it was emanations. Maybe it was the demi-orgos. There are all, basically, in the history of philosophy, there are all kinds of ways people have tried to bridge the gap between God and material existence. So, all right, even if you say that, okay, you could say that. Ed Fazer did this analogy from his book. He said, if you look at a caboose, and the caboose is moving, why is the caboose moving? Well, because it's attached to a boxcar. And then you can say, well, why is the boxcar moving? Well, it's attached to another boxcar. So at this point, you could say, well, maybe there's an infinite number of boxcars. Well, that's not going to work, because a boxcar can't move by itself. So it means that because the caboose is moving, there has to be a locomotive, something that has the principal motion within it. Or you can take it the opposite way, which I did in the same introduction. Let's say you want to build a bridge. Okay, in order to build a bridge, you have to. There's the water there. You got to put a form into the water made out of wood. You pump all of the water out of that form, and then you get to the bottom. And then, well, it's mud. Well, what you have to do is you find something that does not move. So it's the opposite of the boxcar now. It's something that does not move. You can't build a bridge unless you find something that does not move. Water will move, mud will move. Finally, you get down to the bedrock, that will not move, and then you can start building the bridge. Now, the analogy to the boxcar would be, well, maybe I have an infinite number of bricks. Well, it doesn't matter if you have an infinite number of bricks. Unless something doesn't move, you can't. That bridge won't stand.
Right.
This is the elimination of the infinite regress, which I did not go into with the guy. So I said, this thing could not have created itself. Therefore, something else created it. That something is what all men call God. That's it. Now, there is no way to refute that. You can go to all kinds of histories of there are philosophers who have tried, and they failed. If you want to go on YouTube, the ultimate authority on everything. Okay, type in Copleston-Russell, and you'll get the
that debate.
The debate between Frederick Copleston, the Jesuit who wrote the history of philosophy, and Lord Bertrand Russell, the famous philosopher of the 20th century. And Copleston goes through his proof, which is basically, you can't have an infinite succession of contingent beings. You know, why do you exist? Well, you didn't bring yourself into existence, did you? No. Your parents brought you into existence, okay? Well, who brought them into existence? Well, their parents. Well, are you going to have an infinite line of parents? No, it's like the infinite line of boxcars. No, it's not going to work. You have to have something that didn't have to have someone else bring it into existence.
And Russell couldn't handle it.
Well, he said that's the necessary being. All men call this God. And Russell says, basically, I think we should change the subject.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know what to say. He tried to pin the ontological argument on him, which is not what this is. He failed, and they said, well, let's change the subject.
Now, how I see it, Jesus said, watch out for the leaven of Herod. And I see Herod as the government. And our government, like you were talking about separation of church and state, our government has a constitution which does not acknowledge God, a legal system that does not acknowledge God because it's separation of church and state. And they're imposing, because we go to government schools, we go, you know, it's subtle, it's sometimes not subtle, but eventually this is what's happening. The process of this leaven.
It worked itself out over a period of centuries. And basically what you're saying is right. The same thing that is true of the founding fathers is true of Darwin himself. So Darwin himself knew he could not get away with saying that he was an atheist. So this was his way of promoting atheism and keeping his privileged position in the society at the same time. So it's like being a homosexual. You used to have to become an artist so that you'd have a cover for your homosexual activity. Well, that's not necessary anymore. And it's not necessary to have a cover for your atheism. You can be out front, open with it, and that's the world we live in. Okay, so we don't need that anymore.
But you're also saying, no, England is half atheist, I think Norway is half atheist. It's the result of these metaphysical principles
working
themselves up, and people being guinea pigs. I mean, they're suckers for it.
Well, they've been told what to think. That's what education is. You're told what to think.
Well, like when we were having breakfast and we were talking about your friend there that was in the Notre Dame class, and then he got together with the girl, and she said, "Yeah, I didn't really believe that either, but but I don't want to get a bad grade."
Yeah.
So the pressure.
Well, you see the pressure. That's what the pressure is.
Yeah, so they're tempted just to go along with it, even though they don't really.
Go along.
Yeah.
Go along. That's what education is, so I can get a job. Okay? So what we have shown now, and write in, tell me, YouTube has all kinds of space for comments. Write in and tell me where I'm wrong. Okay? But I'm proceeding that I've just proved it, okay? And now that I've shown that it's rational to believe that God exists, anyone who tells me he does not believe in it is being irrational. And so if you're being irrational, I have to make a certain, why are you making that statement? It's not because of ontology or because you looked at the world and discovered this principle. It's psychology. It's because of you got personal issues.
But they also want to claim and use the atheism to promote a cause. Yeah, but like you pointed out, there wasn't one point in history where a group of people didn't believe in God. And they thought they had a couple.
It comes with being a human being. It comes with speech.
So how could these people...
There's never been a time when human beings did not speak to each other and live in communities. And when they lived in these communities, they always worshiped God. So it's just part of the standard outfit you get when you're created as a human being.
Right, so anybody that's an atheist and they're trying to get a movement or be part of a movement, how could they be helping the human being when the human being craves a relationship with God? I mean, it's just part of him, and then you're going to deny him that? How is that being...
And now we have to shift gears now. Now we're in the realm of psychology. In other words, in order to answer any of these questions, we're going to have to delve into the psychology of the people who are the atheists. And this, of course, is not, Paul Vitz has written a book called Faith of the Fathers. Just as a little public service announcement, Fidelity Magazine published this 25 years ago, one of the first articles that led to this book. So we've been on this thing for 25 years now. 25 years. So what Paul Vitz does is basically delve into the psychology of all of the prominent atheists, Voltaire, Sigmund Freud, and what he finds is basically a defective father.
Now, in the old days, you could be an atheist. You'd be called an atheist, not like today. Because just by denying Christianity in certain aspects, they might call you an atheist. It probably applies there too, I guess. I don't know.
Well, obviously, Christianity is it's all God, no matter which God it is. But the point here is that it's defective father. So, Richard Dawkins, don't know. Well, let's put it this way. The classic example would be Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud talked about the Oedipal complex as a basically rebellion against the father. This is what he was promoting. That was the essence of his psychology. He said at one point all men desire to commit incest with their mothers and sisters. Don't know about that. I'm not sure that's an empirical study. Can we call up the Gallup organization? Didn't do this. Obviously, just projecting this. When you're projecting this, you're talking about yourself. Some people have said that the writings of Sigmund Freud are the longest autobiography on record. Well, it turns out that he had fell in love with his sister-in-law and eventually ended up having an affair with his sister-in-law. And instead of just saying that's what I did, he projected it onto mankind in general. So what you see here is the projection of some type of hurt, some type of trauma onto the world at large. So what he says is basically that these men lost their father at a crucial point in their development. Nietzsche is another example, famous atheist, was very attached to his father, who happened to be an evangelical pastor in Germany, lost him at, I think, a young age, the age of 5, which is the crucial stage where you disengage from your mother and you engage with your father, 3 to 5. The father just disappears like that, and he's wounded by this disappearance, and he takes it out on God, the Father, and Christianity. His father was a Christian missionary. Dawkins is in a similar situation. He was at a boarding school, an Anglican boarding school, and was sexually molested by one of the teachers at a time. Well, this is going to discredit religion, and it's also going to discredit the God who is the basis of that religion, which is God the Father. Okay. The really interesting part of this, so he goes through one example after another. It's pretty clear there's something going on here. Okay, the really interesting thing happens when he gets to Christopher Hitchens. Now, Christopher Hitchens had a father who was a naval hero during World War II. But, you know, naval heroes are great during wars, but then the war's over, and then you kind of have to shift gears. And he was in the Navy at the time when the British Navy decided, the government decided it can't afford it anymore. So he got downsized. And at this point, he became an accountant. And so he was, in a sense, a defective father. The interesting thing about this is Peter Hitchens is Christopher's younger brother. And Peter Hitchens is not an atheist. He idolized his father. He emphasized, let's say, the war hero guy. It's in his book. He's written a book called Rage Against God, which is his autobiography, where he was an atheist and in rebellion and then got over it, whereas Christopher never got over it. So what's the difference here? They have the same father, you know. Is he a weak guy? Well, I mean, maybe he was weak when he was an accountant and strong when he was a war hero, but it's still the same guy. So which father are you going to choose? Well, I think this is the point where personal morality becomes important.
Right. You can decide to admire your dad regardless.
Yeah. So why don't you? Well, I think that what we're talking about here is Christopher Hitchens' life as the Hemingway of our day. Heavy drinker, womanizer, abandoned his first wife when she was pregnant. Just things that are reprehensible.
Right.
Which he admits in
and then he's enslaved to those pleasures.
So he's enslaved to these passions. Obviously, he died of
cancer of
the esophagus.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like an alcoholic death. It's either cancer, the drinking and smoking. You either get cancer of the esophagus or you get varicose veins of the esophagus, they burst and you die, you bleed to death. That's how Jack Kerouac died. Jack Kerouac was an alcoholic. So it's a death, an alcoholic's death. So you can't control your passions. So let's put it this way, let's put it mildly, you're a jerk. Okay, Christopher, I know, de mortuis nil nisi bonum, he's dead, he can't respond to me. If he were here, I would tell him, Christopher, you're a jerk. Okay, I never had the privilege of debating him, but the evidence is there. So what is the cause then? I think in addition to this sense of failed father, it's the life you lead, of morality, especially sexual morality. And lo and behold, it turns out that Aldous Huxley, the grandson of T.H. Huxley, who was the biggest promoter of Darwin, said that we loved meaninglessness, i.e. the Darwinian universe, where there's no meaning to the universe, because it allowed us to act out our sexual desires. Well, it sounds like to me that Christopher Hitchens is a classic example of this type of thing. So you don't want to follow the moral law because you want to do what you want. So who's the author of the moral law? Well, it's God. And so if you discredit God, well, then the moral law. Why should I, if the God doesn't exist, why do I need to follow the moral law? Because he created it. And so therefore, it's just a worthless piece of paper.
You're talking about the fathers. At breakfast, it brought up that the whole World War II generation, that would be Christopher Hitchens' dad, but the Americans seemed to have failed. And so everybody in our generation, the baby boomers, felt, in a sense, a father deprivation.
Well, I think that now you're getting to Paul Vitz has his explanation. Like the first explanation is, why do we have this atheism craze all of a sudden? Well, I think Vitz is saying, well, it's a sequel to the sexual revolution, basically, where basically the fathers walked out on their responsibilities, and because they walked out on their responsibilities, you have a whole generation of people now who can't believe in God. Well, God is an exalted father. That's what Sigmund Freud said. He's right. God is an exalted father, but not in the sense he understood it. You get your idea of who God is from your father.
But you're saying that the World War II generation, in a sense, is what everybody believed, walked out on their responsibilities, spiritual responsibilities to impart truth, Christian truth, whatever. But they did their own thing. World War II changed them. There was some social engineering.
The main effect of war is the corruption of the morals of the people who take part in it.
So if they were corrupted, they couldn't pass on good morals.
So they're corrupted. They come back. They were the most socially engineered generation in American history because they were all in the army. And the army is nothing but social engineering. 16
million.
And so what they all come back to home, back to the United States, and now where the United States is in the business of social engineering. You're not going back to your hometown. You're going to Levittown. You're going to live in a one-story house in Levittown, which means you're going to have to buy a car. And you're also going to buy a television because you're not going back to that ethnic neighborhood. So when you left for war, you were Polish or you were Irish or something like that. And now you come back and you're not going back to that neighborhood because all the black people are moving up from Mississippi to drive you out, which is also part of the social engineering. And you have to find a home in the suburbs because, well, let's face it, we needed new homes. The homes hadn't been built for 15 years. If you add the Depression to World War II, you've got this huge backlog, and now they're churning out these one-story bungalows in Levittown, and that's where the soldier goes from the barracks to the bungalow. And he becomes a guinea pig in another experiment. And we were the children of that generation.
But their morals were weakened by World War II.
Of course they were.
So they couldn't pass on to us strong morals because they didn't have them.
They were undermined. They were undermined. And let's put it this way. The church is made up of people who were undergoing this social engineering or whose fathers were subjected to this social engineering. And the church, in general, internalized the commands of its oppressors. And that's why the church is in such a weak position to this day.
And they came back very proud that they had saved the world.
Right.
And so they're full of pride.
There was a dual effect here. If you were part of the WASP elite, you went into the army as an officer, and you came out of the army feeling that we had whipped fascism. And so all you have to do now is portray anybody you don't like as a fascist, and then they'll be on board with whipping them too, which is who were the next candidates for fascism? Catholics, because of people like Franco in Spain and so on and so forth. They're suspects because of their origin. That's what Louis Wirth said, University of Chicago professor. So if you came back as an enlisted man, you came back without an identity. You went in as a Polak or an Italian or a whatever, German. Eisenhower was a German, right? Okay? And when you came out, you were an American. And you identified yourself according to your class, which is basically how much money you could earn.
So this was the social engineering, like you're in your book, The Slaughter of the Cities, Louis Wirth, which was Stalinist, similar to the Stalin. You're trying to wipe out the ethnic distinctions.
Right. He was
I'm an American.
He was following Stalin's ukases about ethnic cleansing. He was a Stalinist. He was a communist. And he imposed that same form of ethnic cleansing on the United States of America.
Yeah. So what was happening in the Soviet Union was happening here because we were very similar.
Right. Very similar. Because
except we had God and trust we had on our money, but we weren't trusting God in our government.
No. And this is antithetical to everything that we were taught in school that our government stands for. Consent of the governed has no place in a regime on social engineering. You don't even know it's happening, much less trying to object to it. And it was all portrayed as science, too. You know, it was all portrayed as somehow scientific. The fact that, you know, these black people are moving into your neighborhood, the prices fall out, you got to move. It was all just, well, that's just part of life, you know. So this is we were all damaged by this. And as a result, we were struggled to be fathers.
We had to struggle, but we had to lay our own foundation.
Some people struggled and they failed. Some people didn't struggle. They gave in and they went with the flow. And as a result, their children find it hard to believe in God.
Right. So it's the grandchildren of the World War II
Right.
soldiers who, it's in my case, I mean, in my family I see it, that are the new atheism. And it's based on evolution, because I know directly in my family, my nephews, evolution is the reason for their atheism.
Yeah. So that explains why it was suddenly blossomed like this. Well, it's the final outcome of wrecking the family. Because feminism, the damage that did to the father, you know, at the Notre Dame symposium on Land O'Lakes.
Oh, the lady,
fat lady,
the heavier set lady in the front.
The fat lady got up, and she didn't sing, but she opened her mouth, and this torrent of feminism just gushed out like vomit on the entire audience. And the guys, and she complained about Land O'Lakes because there were no men there.
Yeah, but Notre Dame was all men. There was no girls at Notre Dame.
There were no men at Land O'Lakes.
Well, why would there be? It was an all-boys school.
Care. And all the priests there, like Johnny Jenkins, she just kind of sat there and think, oh.
I can't believe we did that.
I'm so sorry.
It's kind of like having had slaves, you know. It was like almost equal to
Can we tear down the monument? I just feel, I'm so ashamed of being a man. But what are we talking about here? What when the fat lady sang, what was she singing about? She's an agent of social engineering. And so you have all these Catholic educators over there patting themselves on the back because they worked for the government and engaged in the social engineering of Catholic students, naive Catholic students, by indoctrinating them into the science of Darwinism.
Well, she was saying social justice. I mean, you could have said, I'm for social engineering. And the fella from Venezuela, was a freshman, was saying that he had to flee. His family had to flee Venezuela because of this social justice, almost, is what he was saying. I don't know if you were there for that part, but you know. But he hit back and he said, "But what about truth? Where does truth fit into this?" I mean, he was like trying to get a clear answer from her, and she just said, "Well, I think we're saying the same thing." And it's like, just left him no answer.
No. So now, so what can we say? There's no foundation to this edifice anymore. When there's no foundation, it's bound to collapse, because there is your atheism is irrational. Your atheism is preposterous. Natural selections does not explain anything. It doesn't explain change, much less this type of change. It explains nothing. So there's nothing there. It's the only thing that we can talk about are your hang-ups.
But you said with Hitchens there was an opportunism. In other words, he was an atheist because it gave him an opportunity, even maybe to climb socially.
Well, yeah, running off with the Jewish lady, the second wife.
But if our government
certainly didn't hurt his career. I mean, it's no secret that these people have big influence when it comes to the publishing industry and can make you, in a way. And he got made by his, it was his atheism book that finally made him. It's once again, another tragic story. It's like the Mapplethorpe story that we already talked about, If you're going to sell your soul to the devil, make sure you have a good lawyer to write up the contract. Because once again, Hitchens, like Mapplethorpe, he got fame, but he forgot to ask for health. And so he's on top of the world, and suddenly he's got cancer of the esophagus, and then he dies. And that's the end. Too bad. So now he's there with his maker. I mean, see him, the maker, face to face. I don't know what he's going to say, but...
Yeah, but the problem with separation of church and state, our government buying into evolution, buying into atheism in a sense, then people are tempted, because you can go up in the government, you can go up in that system.
You have to.
By being an atheist. So it's
almost you can't get anywhere.
So it's almost like communism, where you went high because you were a communist.
Don't badmouth communism by associating it with this. I've told this story before, but my oldest son went to Harvard. I didn't understand what Harvard was at that point. It's a tryout to get admitted to the club. So he got invited by the Porcellian out to lunch. The first thing they asked him was what he felt about Darwinism. And at that point he gave the wrong answer, and that was the end of it. That's the end of your, he still got the degree. You could still hang that on the wall. But if you're thinking of becoming a master of the universe, forget it. You gave the wrong answer, buddy. Sorry, I wish, if I were tuned in and willing to sell my soul, I should have told my son, yeah, when they say Darwin, say yes. When they say jump, you just say how high.
See, I believe when I was a senior in high school, I visited Notre Dame. My sister was at St. Mary's. My cousins were at Notre Dame. And my sister was kind of pretty, and she didn't think she was too smart, so she hung out with all the real smart boys. It was a 7-to-1 ratio. And they constantly told me, and my sister remembers it to this day, is that they would say, we are effed up, and we don't know why we're effed up. I mean, they just told me, 'cause back then people were kind of like blunt. They couldn't figure out why they couldn't figure out anything.
Surprising? Is it surprising that an 18-year-old cannot figure out?
Well, these guys would have been 20.
It would have took me 30 years of research in places like the Rockefeller Archives to figure out, and you're not, an 18-year-old doesn't figure it out? No, of course not.
But I think evolution, looking back, I think it played a role. Because once science becomes dominant and you believe it's true, how do you lay a foundation on that?
You can't. They did
not honestly.
They did not know how to answer the arguments of the evolution, which meant that science trumped religion, which meant that they could abandon their morals, which meant that they ruined their lives. Or maybe he didn't ruin their lives. I mean, our friend on Saturday did not ruin his life because he found a priest who was actually willing to tell him the straight stuff. So that's the type of... so God is in control of history. He's not going to let Notre Dame run the universe for him. I know, Father Hesburgh thinks he should have thought there was a mistake on God's part, but that's not the way it works.
So why do you think this goes on? Obviously, there's some priests that are concerned about this, but nothing can be done.
Because the church has capitulated. That's why.
But you're saying they capitulated kind of at a metaphysical level too. I mean, the capitulation is subtle.
The capitulation is in many aspects. There's a capitulation for money, but I mean, when you abandon the teaching of metaphysics, you're sending the army into the troops with no weapon. Nobody knows metaphysics anymore. This is Dawkins making metaphysical statements. He doesn't know metaphysics. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And the fact is that Notre Dame grads can't call him on it because they don't know either. Thanks to Erna McMullen.
Right. McMullen was in the 50s and
No, 60s.
60s? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Father Herman Reith, who wrote the textbook, The Introduction to Metaphysics, which was a textbook at Notre Dame University, which everyone had to take. The sequence was clear. It was logic, it was rational psychology, and it was metaphysics.
Well, before my dad, I still have his textbook before World War II. It was logic. It was Father McBrien, logic, Aristotle book. But I think it did change. My uncle used to fund. He came after World War II to Notre Dame, and he was totally into evolution, funding dinosaur hunts. There was a big shift.
Yeah.
Because he was into the Marines, he was into that, and
Yeah. So okay, it's over. It's over. There's no foundation for this. I'm releasing the captives here. Okay, the jails are open. You can all come out now. Now the question is, are you going to be like the killer whale? You know, they let the killer whale out of the tank, and they put him in the ocean, and all he does is swim in 80-foot circles, because that's all he knows how to do. You know, I'm opening the jail, and are you going to run back in? You're going to refuse to leave? That's the question, because there's no foundation with it. It doesn't work. It's wrong, flat out wrong. I'm saying it. You're released. Okay, it's okay to believe in God. It's rational to believe in God. The burden of proof is on them.
But Notre Dame does believe in God. So where's the problem, though?
What you have is this dichotomy of science and religion, where the God that they believe in is simply not the sovereign God, creator of the universe, who holds all things together. He is not necessary being. They have this truncated, psychological, effeminate God that they're promoting over there. I'm saying, in spite of the fact, I mean, they have a liturgy over there. They follow the rubrics of that, you know. But when it comes to exploring any contradictions, they immediately capitulate, and they go with.
They let the contradictions lie there.
They let the contradictions
which
lie there.
tend to psychologically just wipe out the students. They can't.
You cannot have contradictions in this regard.
No, you have to always work on a contradiction.
And basically, you can only believe in God if it's real. If it's not real, I'm not going to believe in it. And this was the crisis we all faced as baby boomers in college. Well, it's not real. Well, I'm not going to believe
Well, it raises the issue of the historicity of Adam. If Adam's not real and Noah's not real, well, then
what's real?
Well, obviously.
Right.
Was Christ, did he really rise from the...
atoms bumping into each other? That's what Bertrand Russell believed. That's stupid, but that's what he believed. Atoms formed. You think that's science? Good luck, fella. Explain that one to me.
Well, it's not a small issue. Like Sunjena said, 47% of the people said why they weren't going to church. They've been persuaded by the scientific...
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. That's why it's important.
Okay, this is Peter Helland on the show Israel, Dr. E. Michael Jones. It's a privilege to have him on. So till the next time, God bless.
I've gone to this effort. Talk to me, child. The best adaptation.